Hello, CJCS listeners. I'm Lloyd Robertson, wishing CJCS a happy 100th anniversary.
107.1 CJCS FM. Good morning. I'm Jamie Cottle. CJCS Radio, we are celebrating our 100th anniversary, and we are thrilled, excited to welcome a esteemed CJCS alumnus. Joining us here in the studio is the one, the only, Lloyd Robertson. Lloyd, it is wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for coming to Stratford, and thank you so much for being here.
Jamie, it is great to be back. It's great to be in this building, in this studio, because CJCS, was injected into my DNA very, very early.
Yes,
when
exactly.
I was a tad, in fact.
Yes, and we're going to chat all about it. First off, we're going to do some house maintenance. This is actually being filmed. We have Craig Thompson and the crew with Ballinran Entertainment. They're actually filming this. And Lloyd, I know you're much more comfortable with cameras than I am, so you're right at home here.
Oh, yeah, sure. Anything.
And you've also got family members here as well.
Yes, my son-in-law is here. My wife and daughter are shopping.
Okay, fair enough.
So good for them.
It's a family affair. So, Lloyd, let's take you back to the early days. For you growing up in Stratford, you and I are both born and raised in Stratford, Stratfordites. For you growing up in Stratford and then listening to radio and thinking, I don't just enjoy radio, I want to be a part of this. Take us back to those days.
Well, there was the big box in the corner, which was our radio set. Then, of course, that corner would have been occupied later by a TV set. But in those days, it was all radio. And it was very, very important because that's where you got all your information. And CJCS became a companion in our lives during that time. And I remember asking my father, so, Dad, how does this work? Where does the sound come from? How do the voices get in there? Where do those wires go? And he did his best to answer my kid questions because I'd be a tad of about 4 or 5 years old. But even then, I found myself fascinated by the idea of communications, things flying through the air. So CJCS became, as I say, a companion for us, but really for me much more than that, because other kids may have been interested in the hockey players of the day, the Howie Meekers and so on. But the companions for me were the announcers on CJCS. They were my stars. There was, people like in those days, and few would remember Stan Tapley. There was C. Zagar. There was young Frank Squires. And these were all people I grew up with. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I got to meet the people who were colleagues of mine in my day. But CJCS was very much a part of the community because this is where we got, as I say, all of our information. Yeah. Our news, our birth announcements, our death announcements, the current events, what was going on, everything flowed through the radio. Mm-hmm.
When we think of social media, when we think of social media today, it was all in one spot in radio.
Sure, that's right, and local radio especially, because in those days, even though you may have listened to the bigger stations like CFPL London, CJBC, Toronto, that kind of thing, you always came back to the local station because that's where you got your basic information. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, was my place. Yeah. And I thought, wow, I didn't imagine being a part of it one day, but then came the March Home Parade by the Perth Regiment in 1946, and I found myself standing at the bottom of a stand with my buddies, which was put up by the radio station at the corner of on Downing Street, across from the City Hall, and Ken Dugan and Ken Ellis. I remember their names to this day. They were doing the commentary of the march home of the Perth Regiment. These were the people who had been off fighting for us and were now coming back. And this was the big parade, a very big day. So naturally, that was broadcast, and it was live. Mm-hmm. Well, the excitement was palpable. Oh. I mean, I felt it. Everybody in the town felt it. We were all there, and we had this sense that this is an occasion that we can all feel a part of because it's something we've lived through. I mean, I listened to the war news on the radio, listened to the speeches by Winston Churchill, the victory speech from Buckingham Palace. All those great, great moments all came through the radio. Mm-hmm. And here I was at another great moment of war history the end of the war, the march home of the troops from my hometown.
Yeah, just exactly. It's the magic of radio, and it's interesting with CJCS in the early days being part of events like that, not just simply broadcasting from their station. They're out and part of the community that way.
Oh yes, and for me, that's when I really caught the bug, and that's when I began to ask to hang around the radio station, which in those days was above the beer parlor in the Windsor Hotel.
Okay.
And I tell you, it got rowdy on a Saturday night sometimes. and when I would go up there and just sort of help the guys if I could, you'd hear the fights in the bar below.
Yeah.
And some of the guys would be saying, better go down and either shut that thing down or become a part of it.
So you just kind of showed up at the radio station?
Well, yes.
To a degree.
Yes, to a degree, that was it. I went up and said, would you allow me to come in and see how this works? I was a kind of a brash kid, I have to admit that.
Hey.
And so I got in, I sat in on a few occasions, and then gradually there were a couple of guys who got kind of nervous about this kid sitting there and watching them all the time. Because sometimes they wanted to bring up their girlfriends, sometimes they wanted to run downstairs for a beer, sometimes they wanted to go out and put on a long record and not even be there for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And this kid might tell the boss. So Stan Tapley, dear Stan Tapley, who became a very good friend of mine, he was the manager even then, and he came to me and he said, son, he said, I think you've got a real interest in this business. I could tell that. But we're going to ask you just to cool it for a while. Come back and see us in a few years.
And how did you react at that time?
Pardon?
How did you react at that time when he said
Well, I was crestfallen because I didn't want to leave the radio station. But I kept listening, of course. It was still part of my life. Yeah. But he was so nice about it that I thought, well, I will come back. And it happened that when I was in grades 10, 11, 12, one of my buddies was the stepson of the owner of the radio station, Frank Squires Sr.
All right.
His name was Arthur Burt. So I said, Art, do you think you could get me an introduction to Dad one day? He said, sure, no problem. So one day, I'm over at his house, and Dad comes in, and I'm introduced to the owner of CJCS, the owner.
The top dog.
The top dog. So he says, yeah, and Art was very casual about it all. He said, I think my friend Lloyd is kind of interested in broadcasting, wants to break into radio. And he says he's been up there. You may have seen him around. And then Frank says, oh, yeah, I remember this kid. Yeah, you used to hang around sometimes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. What do you want to do? So I said, well, I want to work in radio. That's what I want to do, work in radio.
Yeah.
So he said, well, I'll put you in touch with our program director, a very refined gentleman by the name of Alex Smith, who also at that time owned a music shop in town.
Really?
Alec L. Smith, yeah.
Okay.
And he was also the program director of the radio station. The music shop didn't work out for him, but radio did. Mm-hmm. So Alec interviewed me. He said, well, there might be something that we can work you into after school and Saturdays, because I was aware that they had employed another young man by the name of Gord Ballantyne from the high school to work after school on Saturdays, and he was leaving to go on to other things. He was graduating. So I was able to take his place, which meant coming in.
Perfect timing.
Big time. Rolling the records, not doing any announcements yet, but rolling the records, helping the broadcasters choose the records, that kind of thing. Then one day, Bill Incoll, who became a pal of mine, he eventually was full-time at CJCS and went to CKCO Kitchener and was the sportscaster and worked a bit for CTV and was also famous for his Bowling for Dollars show.
Right, of course.
Some may remember that.
Remember it all.
Dear old
Absolutely.
Bill. Yeah. Bill used to call me Lloydrick. That was the name.
Lloydrick.
That was the name he adapted for me. And so he said, why don't you try a station break? Try a station break. So I said, well, what do I do? He said, just go in there, press down that little button, and say CJCS, Stratford. So I was very, very, very nervous. So I went in, I sat down, and the music came to an end, and he cued me. And I said, CJCS, Stratford. And I realized I'd blown my very first opportunity to be on
And
the
you were
radio
just
for
almost
real.
walking away, walking out.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
my gosh.
Because I was so nervous. And there was a thing at the time that, the teachers at the school would say, and remember, it's not Stratford, it's Stratford, just like Stratford.
Yes.
That's right.
Exactly.
I eventually knew how to say that. But that time I was so concentrated on not making it Stratford that I called it Stratford.
Oh, my gosh.
So they laughed. I was devastated. My friends heard it, and of course they teased me about it for weeks and months
yes,
afterward.
of course, absolutely.
But, and this was the thing about CJCS, they were so good about everything. They said, get back up on the horse. So you've fallen off once. Big deal. Get back up. So I did. And it was that way all the way through.
Wow.
Every opportunity I had, I was encouraged to go further. I was encouraged to try something else, to try something new, to take on this, to take on that. And I eventually ended up doing everything.
Yeah.
When I was hired full-time in 1952, and that was another thing, when I finished high school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I wanted to work at the radio station full-time. And as it happened, there was an opening. 2 announcers had moved on, and I would fill one of the slots. Only people kept saying to me, I think you're filling both slots, the kind of shift you've got, which was Rise and Shine.
Okay, Rise and Shine, which the hours were roughly what?
6:30 to 9.
6:30 to 9 in the morning, Rise and Shine.
6:25, actually,
Okay.
beginning with March of the Day.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would definitely want to talk about all the shows that you were involved in, because certainly through the years, there's the Stork Report, or just all the shows that you were involved with at CJCS. So we got Rise and Shine.
Right. Rise and Shine. Then there was another hour called Suggestions and Music from 12 until 1. These suggestions were basically ads, and the music was sparse because there were more ads than music, of course. That's how we sold. And then there was the big major newscast, 12:30, which was read by the program director himself, Alex Smith. Beautiful voice, nicely modulated, great presentation. And I thought, oh, I'd like to do that someday. So he allowed me to do it on Saturdays. So I did it on Saturdays. And I would do on Saturdays, I'd do Rise and Shine and the newscast. But during the week, it was Rise and Shine, followed by, not to forget this one, the Stork Club at 11 o'clock. The new arrivals at Stratford General Hospital, at the Mitchell Hospital, St. Mary's, because we were Perth County, too. We were everything, St. Mary's, Mitchell, Listowel, etc. So then Suggestions of Music with the news in the middle. And there was also a section in there where the commercials were very heavy between the end of Bill Incoll's Sportscast at 12:20 and the beginning of the news at 12:30. And Bill and I would share commercials. He'd read one, I'd read one, etc. And there was a bookstore, Blow's bookstore, Stan Blow's. Stan, I think, may still be around.
It is still, and they're celebrating, 70 years.
Oh, yeah, long time. Yeah, exactly. And Bill decided that he would clown around with their commercial one day. Well, Stan Blow's loved it, and it broke us up all the time.
And he would try to get you to laugh.
He'd be trying, he'd make me laugh, and then he'd laugh. And so the last 5 minutes before the main newscast of the day were filled with laughter because it was these 2 characters trying to read the commercials.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And then at 1 o'clock, I had a break until 5 when I came back and did Uncle Lloyd's Birthday Club.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that. Uncle Lloyd's Birthday Club.
I played and played and played the Teddy Bear's Picnic over and over and over. It was requested almost every day. And we had lots of birthdays. And that was one of those shows where they allowed you to go on for as long as you had the birthdays. So sometimes it would be till 5:30.
Okay.
Other times it would be till 10 after.
Yeah.
But there was always something. There was always, there was always at least one birthday from somewhere in Perth County. That was a very popular show.
Oh, for sure.
Uncle Lloyd's Birthday. Yeah. Then, my big newscast, 6:30.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So I was actually working from 6:30 in the morning until 6:30 at night.
Wow. And then including Saturdays as well.
Saturday morning.
Saturday morning.
Half day Saturday.
Wow.
Yeah.
You put in your time, Lloyd. My goodness.
I paid my dues,
Yes.
as they say, Jamie.
So, again, your time here at CJCS, and then you're here in the early days of the Stratford Festival Theater.
Yes, I was. I was here for the opening. When the tent went up, we followed the progress of the tent going up. And that was really an exciting time. And I was also here for the debate went on, the debate about whether or not there should be a festival in Stratford. And there was some disagreement about that because, the CNR shops was the center economic poster of the town. But it was going under because diesel had arrived, steam was going out and fading, the shops were closing. What were we going to do? What would be the main industry? Now, we had the furniture factories, and we had some retail. We would have been okay, but without the shops as the driving economic force, it was going to be difficult. So, my friend Tom Patterson, and I got to know Tom quite well because he was about a year or two ahead of me in school. But I talked to him about this project a couple of times. And he said, this is so natural for this to happen here because all the elements are here. There's Stratford, there's the Avon River. All the schools are named after Shakespeare plays and characters. So I think all we do is not all we do because he knew he had to have a business plan. So he put a plan before council, and they gave him, a couple of bucks to take a bus to Toronto to meet some directors. He was turned down by the first few he met, but eventually Tyrone Guthrie caught hold of the idea and said, I like it. Let's try it. So he was fortunate in getting Alec Guinness to play Richard III in the opening play, and that was stunning.
Incredible.
It was such a great opening night. Yeah. And the tent worked. The trains would go by. You'd hear the trains going by. Once in a while, there would be a thunderstorm. But generally speaking, it worked. And the rave reviews from that first night, the first few nights, were all over the place. New York Times was here, Toronto Star, all the major papers in North America. And I think even some of the London papers were here for that.
And for you as a young man being part of that, part of CJCS in these early days, and then the Stratford Festival.
Well, one of my great moments was walking into the theater during the rehearsals for Richard III and seeing this lone figure on the stage and thinking, that's Alec Guinness. So I had my huge, in those days, tape recorder, carrying it with me, and I brought it up to the stage, and he looked around because he was all by himself. But he's just sort of walking back and forth, going over some lines, I think, for the next night or 2 nights.
Getting into character, the whole thing.
Yeah. And I said, excuse me, sir, could I have a few words with you? And he looked at me and stopped. And then he smiled. And he said, well, all right, young man. Now, he was either taken aback by the brashness of this kid, or he thought, I'll give this kid a break. So he sat down, and he recorded about a 15-minute interview with me. And I thought, wonderful. So we played that the next day. And then I thought about a week later, I should try to keep that tape. It had already been taped over.
No.
By commercials for Northways or Grafton's or Canadian Tire or whatever.
Live on.
We move on, yeah.
Oh, you got to love
But that
radio.
was my first big interview at the festival that night. And then, I think it was 2 nights hence, he would be up with Richard III. Now is the winter of our discontent, etc.
Fantastic. Yeah. So again,
those were great moments. The festival, the start of it.
Yes.
All during that first year I was here, and part of the second year too.
So you're at CJCS Radio, Stratford Festival. What made you leave the radio station?
Well, it was more personal than anything else. Not the radio station. I loved working at the radio station, but all of my friends had moved on, and there was this feeling that my girlfriend was off to university. My friends were at Western or elsewhere. They'd all moved on. And I was continuing on at CJCS, and I thought maybe I better start thinking about moving on myself. So I didn't get to where I wanted to go which was CFPL London, because a lot of announcers from CJCS, including people like Tom Bird, Jeff Bingle, Jack Ellman, they had all moved to CFPL from CJCS. I was not able to get there. I'd written them a few notes, and they said, yes, you have some promise, but call us back in a few years. So by chance, I think they sent a tape over to Guelph, and Guelph called me, and they offered assistant news director, along with other things. And I thought, well, I may as well give this a shot.
Right. So
off I went. Also, there were some personal issues at home, and I thought I'll just move away for a while.
Yeah.
Never thinking I would never be back, but when I was in Guelph, an opportunity came up for working at the CBC, and things just unfolded from there. So it was nothing to do with CJCS. I loved CJCS. Every moment I worked here, the people, the environment, the whole feeling of being in radio was what trapped me and captured me.
Absolutely.
And indeed, it dominated my life for the remainder of time.
Or I think of actors at the Stratford Festival who may, go on to other theater, but they take that piece of Stratford with them. They take that training and that love of Stratford. So I think you've done that as well.
Oh, yes.
CJCS Radio, you took that with you.
And my father, who was a very special person to me, he told me very on, never forget your roots. And I never did, because when I was asked to come back, and I came back a lot because I had relatives here, they'd asked me to do this and that. And I have come back very, very often through the years. I'm a proud member with a fund in the Stratford Perth Community Foundation. I've been back to the festival a lot. Did interviews with several of the directors. We did a profile on Anthony Cimolini. So I've been back and forth a great deal for a lot of different events, including some for CJCS, like big anniversaries and changeovers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and here we are celebrating CJCS 100th anniversary. Did you think we would be having this conversation?
Really hard to believe. I never thought I'd see the day. But as I think I may have mentioned earlier, you're only 10 years older than I am, because I turned 90 in January this year. I'm 90.
Young. Yeah, happy birthday. My goodness.
Yeah.
Lloyd Robertson. Lloyd, again, any other thoughts or stories in terms of, touched on your relationship with Bill Linkle. I can just imagine you and Bill Linkle back in the day. Any other stories or names that we haven't touched on?
Well, there was a bubbly little lady by the name of Edith Smith. She was married to the program director, Alec L. Smith. And she wrote the commercials. But her longhand was not the best. So there was a company in town called Hugh McKellar Batteries on Erie Street. So what would happen in the morning, I would be handed her longhand copy. And I would try to, tape it out if I had time. I usually didn't. So I would try to read it. And one morning, she had written this copy about the danger of battery powders. But I somehow misinterpreted the whole thing, thinking, why would they be saying, does he want to sell these things? He didn't want to sell them. He wanted to warn you about them. So I wrote this glowing commercial about how great battery powders can be for your car. Oh, did I get in doo-doo over that one. Even Frank Squires called me in and said, my boy, you've learned a lesson, haven't you? And if I'd said no, I would have been out, I think. But I said, oh, yes, sir. That won't happen again.
Oh, my goodness.
And Edith wouldn't. She went into purple-faced rages at me for about a week. But she was so much fun that she just eventually forgave. We had a laugh over it. And we laughed about it every day since. Oh. And then I learned about timing on CJCS because I was given the assignment one day of doing the commercials in the Kentucky Derby broadcast, which was being brought in from the network. So we had like 60 seconds to fill a slot. Now, our commercials on Rise and Shine would be maybe, they'd be sold for a minute, but sometimes you'd go 65 seconds, maybe a minute, 15, hardly ever a minute on the nose.
Okay.
But, boy, you had to do this one in 59 seconds because the race commentator was starting up right at the top of the clock.
Right.
So I bumped into him every time. And John Phillips, who at that time had come from Radio Jamaica, where he established Radio Jamaica, he was the production manager. He said, "You certainly screwed that up, my boy. You'd better learn something about timing." Well, I did.
Okay.
And I discovered that this was put to good use in television years later, because in television you had to be absolutely spot on to the second, because you were being counted down all the time to meet film coming in, to the end of program periods, that kind of thing, all the time. So I learned about timing at CJCS. So CJCS is in my bones, is part of what I am, is part of who I am, and always has been from the time I was like 5 years old.
Well, we're so thrilled that you could be part of our CJCS 100th anniversary of the one and only Lloyd Robertson. And Lloyd, we've had voices from the past, if you will. We're chatting with many CJCS alumnus who are going to be coming back. When we announced we had our CJCS 100th anniversary, we had an email right away from a Jim McDonald who used to work here. And he writes, "Happy 100th anniversary CJCS. I worked at CJCS in 1988 as a young news reporter announcer with news director Doug Lester. It was my first full-time job after college. It was a wonderful learning experience, and I have many fond memories of Doug and the staff, including Jamie Cottle, who I worked with, Stratford and Perth County. My memories include the challenge of reading in memoriams as a fill-in for the regular DJ and riding in the CJCS vehicle in a parade with Lloyd Robertson, a fellow CJCS alumnus. All the best to everyone at CJCS." So there you go, Lloyd.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah, and it's again, it all, as we often say, it gets back to Lloyd Robertson. And you were at CJCS for roughly 2 years, is that?
Yeah.
Wow.
2
but
years.
what a
Well,
what a
if you add on the part-time, it would be 3
sure,
years.
yeah. But what a mark you left, what a legacy, and we're so thankful.
Well, I'm proud to say that, Jamie, and I thank you. But I really want to thank CJCS because I really do owe it so much. It made me what I am. It taught me about broadcasting. I mean, I was very passionate about it, but it was CJCS that took me on, brought me forward, and made me grow, and helped me enormously to launch the career I've had.
And what a career, and what an amazing career it has been. Lloyd Robertson. Lloyd, I'll leave the final word to you. I don't know if there's any final thoughts or anything like that. I'll leave the final word to you.
Well, just to all the listeners out there, that this is a great radio station. I hope you continue to support it, because I know that it's all about local programming with CJCS, and they are trying to serve you. And they serve you very well to the best of their ability, and they really care about that. So keep supporting them. Thank you.
And thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you.